Jean Grey, previously known as Marvel Girl, was the one who was chosen by the Phoenix Force. Naturally, a being so powerful had to have a family that reeks of superpowers. Jean's folks have tons of uber-powerful members, especially her progenies like Nate, Cable, Rachel, etc. From the mainstream Marvel universe to alternate dimensions like Earth 811 and Earth 18119, each member of the Grey clan has brought something unique to their stories and the Marvel universe in general. In this video, we'll explore the key players in Jean Grey's family, starting with her 17th century ancestors. So without further ado, let's begin.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Hans Noblock and Gertrude Hunter, alleged ancestors. First appearing in Cable number 93, Hans Noblock was born in the 1650s in Hamburg, Germany, into this extremely affluent merchant family. In the year 1660, Hans and 5 other kids stumbled upon this meteorite, and naturally, they went on to explore it. But in 6 months, all the other kids died from the radiation emitted from the meteorite, which left Hans as the lone survivor. 10 years later, Hans tied the knot with Lady Gertrude Hunter, another high-class chick, and the daughter of an English lord and all. A year later, Hans and Gertrude land this massive chunk of land in Virginia. In 1673, they welcomed their daughter Gloria, and 2 years down the line, they had a son, William. Then the year 1680 came along, and the third kid, Fiona, joined the party. Things went smoothly for the family, but all hell broke loose for Hans and Gertrude in 1705, when the couple ended up dead during a family boat ride. However, it was not an accident or bad luck. Their own daughter, Fiona, had a hand in it. In fact, she would later go on to become a powerful Marvel villain we'll get in a bit. Speaking of Hans, he was a latent mutant or mutate. His power had not manifested until his death, but he managed to pass on some mutant abilities and mutant genes to his children. It is quite a possibility that our girl Jean had Hans and Gertrude as her ancestors. Gloria Noblock. Gloria appeared in Cable issue 94, which was the same issue where she died as well. She was born in 1673, and by 1692, Gloria had decided to live in Salem, Massachusetts, because she wanted to be closer to her mom's side of the family. But one of the local kids claimed that Gloria was a witch. He must have seen her do something that was humanly impossible, because Gloria had received her powers from her father, Hans. However, the comics do not dwell further on this subject. Next thing you know, Gloria's caught up in the craziest witch hunt. They put her on trial and she was found guilty, not messing around and wasting time. By June 1692, the locals hanged her from the gallows. Fiona Noblock, aka Dark Mother. Fiona Noblock was born in 1680 and was the middle child of 3. Okay, so while discussing Mr. Noblock, I mentioned that Fiona came last into the Noblock family, but I guess they made a slight mistake in issue 93, where Hans first appears. Fiona first appeared in issue 88 of the same comic, which explains the discrepancy. Anyway, her life took a pretty dark turn when her older sister Gloria was tagged as a witch in Salem and executed. This ticked off Fiona big time, especially when the boy responsible for the witch trials became governor. Fiona's parents were like, move on, but she was not someone who let go of things too easily. She goes off the deep end and ends up killing her parents to inherit the family fortune. Then she married 3 times in the early 18th century, and guess what? She kills each of her husbands after having their kids, all girls by the way, and cashes in on their estates too. A woman with a plan, it seems. Later, Fiona starts this group called the Sisterhood, a crew of psychic female mutants. This thing grows like crazy. After 10 generations, about 300 years later, Fiona has over 30,000 descendants, and the Sisterhood itself has 3,000 active members. They're everywhere. Government, military, you name it. Pulling strings like puppet masters. They patiently waited for the US to hit superpower status, and that's when they made their move. Their master plan was to put one of their own, Gina Anderson, in charge by any means necessary. But Fiona's grand scheme hit a roadblock with 2 of her own kin, Cable and Marvel Girl. Cable started tearing down her operation by feeding intel to the government, which led to loads of arrests, including Gina Anderson. In the final fight, Cable, Marvel Girl, and a ton of government agents stormed Fiona's base. Fiona, now known as the Dark Mother, ended up catatonic after a clash with Cable. Fiona had some serious powers like precognition, meaning she could see the future. Then there was her prolonged longevity, which is how she lived lived for more than 300 years, plus telepathy and telekinesis. Charles Grey. Charles Grey was a part of the fancy schmancy Hellfire Club back in the day, when it was called the Order of the Friars of St. Francis of Wickham. In 1757, his buddy John Wilkes pulled this epic prank on Charles, in which he dressed up an ape as the devil. The joke totally freaked Charles out, so they gave him an opiate to chill him out, but Charles went a bit over the top, a lot actually. He started to think that the devil was after him. Desperate to save his soul, Charles goes all dramatic, begging God for forgiveness and stabs himself right in the heart. Interestingly, although his body was gone, his spirit stuck around, all invisible and unable to mess with the living unless under special circumstances. What could be called a superpower of Charles was that he or his spirit had the ability to possess members of his family. 100 years later, Charles's descendant, Malcolm Grey, a wife-beater, was taking it out on Eleanor. Suddenly, ghostly Charles can pick up stuff, like a dagger, and he stabs Malcolm with it. Malcolm's spirit, not ready to check out, jumps into a stillborn Meanwhile, Charles's ghost possesses Malcolm's body. He's in this loveless marriage with Eleanor, who finds some weird comfort in the kitten. Then, when Eleanor was gripping about her husband going cold, ghost Charles went berserk, but the kitten, who was actually Malcolm, saves the day by knocking a vase onto Charles's head, killing him again. Now Charles's spirit gets booted out, and Malcolm's spirit makes the cat jump onto a spiked fence, to get back into his body. But it's too late. Eleanor, who has gone into full rage mode, smashed Malcolm's skull with a poker, so neither Charles nor Malcolm had a body to call home anymore. Lady Jean Grey. Lady Jean Grey, a doppelganger of the modern Jean Grey, was a big deal in the Hellfire Club during the 18th century. She appeared during the American Revolutionary War era, where she ran the Philadelphia branch. This lady had an eye for talent and spotted Elizabeth Shaw, a 15-year-old blonde. Grey, seeing something in Elizabeth, invited her over to the Hellfire Club. Grey and her crew aimed for big things in life, like influencing local and global politics. She saw potential in Elizabeth, who just wanted freedom, and brought her into the fold. 6 months later, Grey and her Hellfire buddies set their sights on Major General Wallace Worthington, a hardcore patriot and Benedict Arnold's replacement at West Point, New York. Grey's plan was to match Worthington with Elizabeth to get an inside track on military secrets. Eventually, Worthington fell for Elizabeth and they tied the knot. Grey then wanted Elizabeth to spill her husband's secrets to crush the American Revolution and hand the win to Great Britain. But things went sideways. Worthington stayed loyal, and Elizabeth, well, she actually fell for the guy. Grey warned Elizabeth about turning her back on the club, but soon after, Worthington was killed and his house torched, which left Elizabeth with nothing but shattered dreams. So yeah, Miss Grey wasn't a very nice woman. John and Elaine Grey, parents. Professor John Grey was a history professor teaching at Bard College. He was married to Elaine Grey and was the father of Roger, Liam, Sarah, Julia, and Jean Grey. Living the mutant life, Jean got into Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, but her folks were in the dark about her powers. They thought she had scored a scholarship to a fancy private school. Professor Xavier, the head honcho there, also played it cool and sent Elaine and John weekly updates about Jean and the super secret government-linked course. Elaine and John, a bit unsure about letting Jean go, got sold on the idea that some bigwigs in Washington, D.C. recommended the school. John found Xavier a solid guy, kind of eerie with his mind-reading vibes, and wondered what government secrets Jean might be learning. One day, they decided to pop by the school on their way to the World Fair in NYC. Warren Worthington III, filling in for Xavier, showed them around. They almost stumbled upon the danger room, but Henry McCoy, aka the Beast, was quick on his feet and passed it off as a gym under renovation. Later, the Goblin Queen, a Jean clone, turned John and Elaine into demons, but that was later fixed. After Sarah's death, they stepped up to care for their grandkids, Galen and Joey. Then came Operation Zero Tolerance, and John, with a little help from X-Man, his alternate reality grandson, saved the day for Joey and Galen. Sadly, John died when the Shi'ar Death Commandos tried to wipe out the Grey genome. Sarah Gray, sister. Sarah Gray, Jean Grey's sister, had her fair share of drama and tragedy. She was happily married with kids and lived a pretty normal life until she wasn't anymore. About a year before Jean's dramatic space incident, Sarah got snatched by a tumor who had this plan to mix surface mutants with his crew to conquer Earth. Jean wasn't too keen on the idea though. She busted in, beat a tumor's forces, and saved Sarah. Sarah's life changed further when she and her husband Paul went missing after they publicly supported mutant rights. It turned out that Sarah was killed by some anti-mutant extremists, likely on Cameron Hodges' orders. To top it off, her body was absorbed by the Phalanx. Her kids, Galen and Joey Bailey, were left orphaned, but didn't get to live long either. The Shi'ar Death Commandos wiped out most of the Grey family, leaving only Marvel Girl and Cable. Despite being labeled as human, Sarah showed some serious skills. A tumor thought she was a mutant, and she showed some serious mental strength resisting the Phalanx, much like her sister Jean. For a brief time, she even had the ability to breathe underwater, but this was only because of what a tumor did to her. However, Jean fixed her up, and she lost that power for good. Interestingly, Chris Claremont, the mastermind behind so much X-Men lore, originally planned for Sarah to be part of the original X Factor as a mutant who could kickstart other mutants' latent powers. Julia Gray, sister. Julia Gray, one of Jean Grey's sisters, was a great cook. Her life, however, changed when the Shi'ar Death Commandos decided to erase the Grey genome from humanity. This was part of their plan to deal with the Phoenix Force, which had picked up Grey as the host, so the Death Commandos wanted to wipe out Jean genome from the face of the Earth. Julia's story is pretty low-key in the comics, as she's not shown much. The only glimpse we get is of her burning body in the front yard. Roger Grey, brother. Roger Grey, another sibling in the Grey family, met his end at the hands of Hypernova, a member of the Shi'ar Death Commandos. Hypernova started off aiming to be a sub-guardian in the Hussar Classic, but flunked out because she couldn't keep her powers in check. Basically, she was too lethal for her own good. Seeing no place for herself in the regular Shi'ar ranks, Hypernova found a new gig with the Death Commandos. Here, her unchecked and deadly powers were not just accepted, but encouraged. In their ruthless mission against the Grey family, Hypernova marked Roger as one of her targets, leading to his untimely demise. Liam Gray, brother. Liam Gray's fate was sealed by Colony, another member of the Shi'ar's Death Commandos. The Colony was now living in hive, like a walking, talking swarm of bugs with one collective mind. Basically, thousands of insects all work together as one sentient being. These bugs could sneak into the tiniest of spaces, gnaw through flesh, and munch through a bunch of materials. Colony's unique form allowed him to control each bug individually, making him a formidable and terrifying opponent. Scott Summers, husband. Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, and Jean Grey had the classic comic book love story right from their debut in X-Men #1. It was like they were meant to be. He was the team leader, and she was the only girl on the team. Their romance was on the slow side, more old school. They didn't even lock lips until the original X-Men series was practically in the rearview mirror. The first real romantic moment happened when Jean left the X-Men following the revamp with the all-new, all-different team in X-Men #94. That's when they finally admitted their feelings and shared a kiss. Jean came back in X-Men #98, and their relationship was full on from then on. But just when things were getting good, Jean seemingly died, only to turn into the ultra-powerful Phoenix. Interestingly, Scott later married Madeline Pryor, who looked exactly like Jean. They even had a kid, but Jean wasn't really dead. When Jean resurfaced, Scott bailed on his family to join her in X Factor. This was well complicated. Madeline turned out to be a clone of Jean, part of some whack plot by Mr. Sinister. Meanwhile, Scott's kid got sent to the future because of a virus. With no wife since she was a clone and all, and his kid in the future, Scott was free to rekindle things with Jean. They got engaged, but not before Scott had a bit of a flirt fest with Psylocke. Their wedding in X-Men #30 was a big deal, especially with everything happening in the Fatal Attractions arc, like Wolverine losing his adamantium. Wolverine, being Wolverine, hung around the wedding in secret, keeping threats like Sabretooth at bay. The wedding itself was a happy affair without any supervillain drama. Scott's brother Alex was the best man, and Storm, who was close to the Phoenix and by extensions Jean, was the maid of honor. Nathan Summers, step/genetic son. Nathan Summers, aka Cable, is an OG time-traveling, battle-hardened mutant with some serious telepathic and telekinetic chops. Born to Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, his life's been anything but ordinary. Madeline turned out to be a clone of Jean Grey, and this revelation drove her to madness and death. As a baby, Nathan got exposed to the techno-organic virus. To save him, he was whisked away to a future where the apocalypse ruled Earth. Growing up as Nathan Dayspring, or the Ascani son, he was groomed to take down the apocalypse. Teen Nathan came back to the past, where he reunited with his family and met his sister Rachel in Krakoa, the mutant haven. But duty called, and he returned to the future to face off against Strife, his clone who was raised by Apocalypse. After years of struggle, Nathan came back to a time closer to his original era. He formed the Six-Pack to keep fighting the good fight, and later took charge of the New Mutants and turned them into the more hardcore X-Force. Cable wanted to shape a better future for both humans and mutants, as he got first-hand experience of what a bad future looks like. He played guardian and mentor to Hope Summers, the first mutant born post-M-Day, and sort of adopted her. Eventually, he rejoined his peeps in Krakoa and stepped into his younger self's shoes as the chief security officer of SWORD, ready to protect and serve in the present. Now, that was all of Jean's relatives from Prime Earth, or Earth 616. But Marvel Comics is not limited to just one universe, right? So let's explore some of her relatives from other universes. Earth 295, Weapon X, husband. Jean Grey and Logan, aka Weapon X, started an unlikely romance back when Magneto was gathering mutants for his version of the X-Men. Logan's wild side was tamed a bit by Jean's mental powers, which sparked a deep connection between them. When Apocalypse decided to crash the party at Cape Citadel to grab some nukes, Weapon X and the X-Men were there to stop him. Logan even took down Sabretooth in a fight, who later switched sides to join the X-Men. Together, Logan and Sabretooth rescued a young mutant, Clarice Ferguson, beefing up the team. Things got rocky when Jean was nabbed by Sinister. Weapon X went solo to save Jean, and even sacrificed his left hand in a fight with Cyclops. After saving Jean, the two ditched the X-Men to take on Apocalypse themselves. Their next mission was to wreck one of Apocalypse's seawall towers, letting the Sentinels through. They clashed with Havoc, but managed to beat him in a wild fight. Mission accomplished. They headed back to Europe, where the Council was debating a nuclear strike on the Apocalypse. Jean wasn't cool with his plan, but Weapon X saw it as the only way to save the world. As Sentinels started moving humans to safety, Jean was busy with the refugee registration. Logan, fearing he was losing Jean, found it just as they were taking down Apocalypse's agents trying to infiltrate Europe. Their disagreement over the Council's nuke strategy got heated. Unable to sway Jean, Logan told her to follow her heart. Back in London, he sensed that Jean was leaving for good. Logan made it to a plane, shared one final kiss, and let her go. A bittersweet end to their intense, action-packed love story. X-Man, Nate Grey, son created from her genetic material. Nate Grey, better known as X-Man, was created in the Age of Apocalypse reality on Earth 295 from the genetic stuff of Cyclops and Jean Grey. You could say he's the mutant equivalent of a nuclear bomb. He could give Cable a run for his money any day, and then some. Legion, Professor X's son, tried to play with him and messed up big time, which led to a future where Apocalypse was the big boss and mutants were on top. In this world, Mr. Sinister cooked up Nate as the ultimate psychic weapon to topple the Apocalypse. But Nate wasn't down for being anyone's pawn. He pieced out, grew up among chill mutants, and eventually joined the fight against the Apocalypse. During a fight with the Holocaust son, Apocalypse, they both got transported into the main Marvel universe. Here, Nate's insane power level had everyone's attention. We're talking mind-controlling the heavy hitters like Omega Red and Magneto, chatting across universes, and even sending a universal group chat. Moira McTaggart even said he's on par with Phoenix-empowered Jean Grey. Nate's own comic series never let us forget just how ridiculously powerful he was. Omega Level doesn't even begin to cover it. Norman Osborn, during his dark reign, was like, this guy's a living god. But even gods have bad days. Nate got whooped by the Dark X-Men and Avengers, and trapped in the Omega Machine, which dialed down his powers big time. He got rescued by the New Mutants and ended up living on Utopia Island, but he was just a shadow of his former self. Earth 811, Scott Summers, husband. Scott Summers from Earth 811 had a life that veered off the beaten path compared to his mainstream counterpart. His story intertwined with Jean Grey, who, in reality, got a full dose of the Phoenix Force without the Cocoon episode. When Jean, driven by the Dark Phoenix, showed her powers to her family, her dad actually got it. He understood the pain she felt from sensing their fear and didn't push her away. This made a world of difference. Jean didn't end her life after the Shi'ar fight. Instead, she and Scott tied the knot and had a daughter, Rachel Summers. But the X-Men failed to stop Senator Robert Kelly's assassination, which sparked massive mutant paranoia and hate. The public freaked out and an anti-mutant president got elected. Right about then, Jean seemingly died in a nuclear blast. The new administration passed a Genetic Purity Act, putting mutants like Scott on the run. The government also unleashed Sentinels to wipe out mutant kind. The Sentinels took it a step further, deciding to take over the United States. The result was a nightmare scenario where almost all superhumans in North America, including Scott, were either killed or locked up. Rachel Summers, daughter. Rachel Ann Summers first appeared in the Days of Future Past storyline from the Uncanny X-Men number 141 to 142. After her mom, Jean Grey, died, Rachel chose the Marvel Girl moniker as a tribute. She even donned a green costume designed by Jean but never worn. She later changed her name to Rachel Grey because her dad, Scott Summers, was getting involved with Emma Frost. Despite this, she and Emma did reach a kind of ceasefire during a mission in Hong Kong. Romance-wise, Rachel had a moment with Nightcrawler, but it fizzled since he had his eyes on Storm, who was in a sort of will they won't they thing with Wolverine. She later traveled to the Savage Land, where she got brainwashed by dino people, the Hauka. They messed with her mind, convincing her she was one of them, and she even used her telekinetic mojo to tweak her own genes to fit in. Don't worry, she snapped back to her usual self later. Post House of M and Dissemination, where mutants were running low on powers, Sentinels got stationed at the X-Mansion as bodyguards. But for Rachel, as she had seen in the past, Sentinels were more about herding mutants into camp than protecting them. Then there was the whole end of the Greys storyline, where she was with her grandparents and other relatives when the Shi'ar Death Commandos crashed the party to wipe out the Grey genome. Rachel survived, but got a death mark slapped on her that made her easy to track. Vowing revenge against the Shi'ar, she made it clear she's not her mum or the Phoenix. She's her own woman, and the Shi'ar were going to regret crossing her. With a little help from Psylocke, Nightcrawler, Bishop, and Cannonball, Rachel thwarted their attack. Philip Summers and Christopher Summers II, sons, Earth 905. Philip Summers and Christopher Summers II, the twin sons of Cyclops and Marvel Girl, inherited more than just their parents' good looks. They got the mutant gene too. Growing up, their parents were seriously stressed about the world they were bringing their kids into. It was a world where mutants were on top, thanks to Charles Xavier going full-on Juggernaut-powered tyrant. Scott and Jean, who had been X-Men, found themselves facing a tough call. They couldn't stand by and watch Xavier's mutant-heavy rule turn oppressive, so they rolled up their sleeves and jumped into the rebellion. Their goal was to flip the whole mutant versus human narrative and build a world where their sons, Philip and Christopher, could grow up safe and sound without being part of a regime that stepped on others. Earth 18119, Logan, husband. In Earth 18119, Wolverine aka Logan married Jean, much like Weapon X did. Everyone thought he was a goner after the Regent's rise to power, but not quite. He was still alive, along with a few other X-Men who managed to dodge the bullet. But Logan tied the knot with Jean Grey. That's right, they went from teammates to life partners, and they had a daughter, Kate. Shine, daughter. Kate Howlett, the daughter of Wolverine and Jean Grey, was always buzzing with energy and smiles. She almost always lit up the room in more ways than one. Kate has this unique ability to play with psychic light, something comparable to a flashlight for the mind. She could dig up lost memories or throw blind her enemy's mind. She can also turn the psychic light into concussive blasts. And like mother like daughter, Kate's telepathic abilities are top-notch, which mirrored Jean's. So essentially, the kid had a head full of mind-reading and mind-talking tricks. Plus, she's got a touch of precognition. Marvelous verdict. So yeah, that was all in this video. It is fairly clear that Jean's family has some really strong members, especially her children. And it is kind of obvious because Jean herself is one of the most powerful superheroes ever. We have done this for several other heroes and villains across DC and Marvel Comics. You might want to check out those videos as well.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave and like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.